Welcome. Thank you for joining us for this planning session around planning virtually for the first days of school for AIS Week. We are going to be discussing during this session how we can maximize these first 10 days of school to ensure that students and parents and our PLCs can start NTI 2.0 off on the right foot, and so that we are building in all of those routines and procedures so that we can have our school year start off right. And we know that the first 10 days of school are the most important for setting the tone and expectation of the school year. My name is Suzanne Kramer. I'm the middle school literacy lead, and I welcome both our high school and middle school English and English language arts teachers. We're so glad you're here. So for this presentation, there is a Padlet. So I'd like to give you a moment to both, let me go back here, both access this presentation via the bit.ly. So I'm going to be quiet for just a second so you all can get this bit.ly pulled up. And if you need to pause the recording to do that, please feel free to do so. And then also to pull up this Padlet so that I know you attended this session and so that you can put in your ideas, learn from one another. You can put in any questions that you might have, and I'll respond to you in that medium. So anytime you see this little feather, that's an indication that there's a question or something for you to reflect on in the Padlet. So you're going to want to pause the presentation and head on over to the Padlet anytime you see that feather. So for our first question in the Padlet, I'd love for you to put what your name is, what you teach, your content, and your grade level. So you'll just press this plus sign on the Padlet, and you can see all of the other questions that I have embedded within this slide deck. And again, whenever you see the feather, you are going to go ahead and head on over to the Padlet to engage in this conversation using this digital tool. So go ahead and fill out your note on that first column and then come back to the presentation. So you can go ahead and pause it, fill out that question, and come back to the presentation. So today, the four major professional learning pieces that we want you to engage in terms of norms are learning by doing, to use these digital tools, to engage in them so that you can use them in your own classroom, to lower the stakes, to know that this new virtual instruction 100% of the time is an iterative process, and we're all growing in it. So give yourself a chance to learn with your students and families. Of course, learning is social, which is why I've embedded the Padlet tool so that we can connect with one another. And you're going to, again, engage with some intentionally chosen digital tools that you may want to use in your own classroom. So our agenda for today, we're going to answer these questions. What should we prioritize during the first days of school? What structures and routines and pacing, cadence should I consider for delivering curriculum virtually? And how do I develop quality tasks and engage students using digital tools? So of course, we know that we're going to be planning backward, no matter the level of design that we're at, whether that's a year-long level, unit, module level, or even lesson planning. We're going to use that backward planning from transfer and summative tasks back through the launch of a unit, or even in a single week or in a lesson. We're going to plan back from that formative assessment. So this is a nice way to conceptualize that backward planning as well. We have over here the products, the performance tasks, so that's where we'd start. And we might toggle back and forth between the standards and the task. We'd want to establish clear success criteria or rubric around those tasks. And of course, in order to have a coherent design, we want to design around something that matters, a big compelling question, problem, or theme. And then in the middle here, we have the process. And this is all of the activities and lessons and work that students are thinking that's in dialogue that students are going to engage in all along the way, that's going to get us from our purpose all the way over here to our performance. All right, so I have, and Jenny has, our high school lead, built a Unit 0 or introductory unit for middle and high. And so I'm going to take a moment to walk you through both of those pieces, and then we'll take a look at how we can use those for planning and integrate those digitally. So of course you can access via the teacher backpack, which is on your waffle. So in your Google Drive, just go up here to your waffle, and you're going to go down here to backpack. And you'll click on teacher backpack. And then if you're a high school teacher, you'll click on the appropriate grade. So we'll just take a look at 9th grade. And here you can find the curriculum frameworks and all the other tools that you're going to need for design and basically for being a teacher in Jefferson County. And here is the introductory unit, Who Am I?, that our high school ELA colleagues have artfully created for you to use. It integrates some really great resources from Facing History and some mini text sets for you to use. So you'll see here, they recommended some lessons, the main activities, and then some tips around how to use the digital tools here. And so this is a really great resource for planning those first 10 days of school with great intentionality. So now I'm going to show you the middle school version of Unit 0. So again, I guess we'll just head on back to our backpack. And we'll take a look at 6th grade. We'll take a look at the curriculum framework. Again, same thing, that's where we can find that Unit 0. And so, of course, our most important task during the first 10 days of school is to establish those routines, procedures, protocols, and relationships that are all going to be part of our classroom community. And maybe now even more important than ever, because we won't be seeing our students face to face. So here is the Unit 0 for middle school. Here you'll see that I've integrated some thought bubbles that are those metacognitive pieces that I'm hoping to get between teachers and their thinking as they're planning this work. You may want to use establishing the success skills and your classroom's definition of those success skills and how they connect to how students will be engaging in online learning. That's a really great way to start out your week. I've also linked in here the EL Education protocols, Facing History protocols, tools for establishing independent reading, because we're going to want to get started strong with all of those pieces the first days of school. And later on in this presentation, I'll share a little bit about some preferred digital tools, excuse me, for how to engage in those protocols digitally. Here, we just have the first two standards, composition and reading, that we'll kind of be focusing on, establishing that academic habit of close reading, repeated reading, and using text evidence to support our thinking, and then also establishing those independent reading and writing routines. And so again, this Unit 0, just like the high school one, is designed around a compelling question. And then here I have a suggestion of 2 to 4 texts, which would be poetry, informational texts, art, that we will use as the core text for this very first unit. And all of these texts are immediately relevant to the last 6 months, and we should consider this a living curriculum. All of our poets here, these first 4 poets are Black poets, and also we know that we are going to be really focused on building an anti-racist pedagogy in an anti-racist classroom where our students can feel validated and affirmed. And so we want to start off the year ensuring that students' experiences of this summer are honored in our digital classrooms, and that their identities are being brought forth through our independent reading and writing. We also have this great Facing History lesson and resource, The Danger of a Single Story, which you all may be familiar with. And then here we have some great formative tasks and summative tasks that you could use along with this transfer task, where students are using the art of Jean-Michel Basquiat, who is a famous painter and student of Andy Warhol. And they'll be learning about that painter and then using poetry and art to create something in the spirit of Jean-Michel Basquiat's art, and then sharing it with their online or school community. And so this is Unit 0 for middle school. All right. So what you'll see here is a fully developed skeleton of what a unit could look like. And this is our JCPS backward planning document for curriculum that we would use in concert with our frameworks. And so if you click on this link right here, that will take you to this full version of the backward plan unit using Unit 0. So if you would pause this video for just a moment, we have the feather, and so I'd love for you to go to the Padlet to answer the question. Our next question is about what structures and routines should I consider for delivering curriculum virtually. So as we think about transitioning from our Unit 0, from those first 10 days of school that are focused on establishing community routines, procedures, and protocols, and how students and families are going to engage with your classroom, we need to be thinking about what the right mix is of independent volume reading, core instruction, those personalized pathways, and how we're going to incorporate our reading writing notebooks, those standards focused close reading and craft mini lessons, conferring, small group discussion, and support. So what is the right mix of these 3 pillars and these 4 sort of instructional pieces that we know are non-negotiables? So I think this graphic is a really useful one in thinking about how students experience online learning, and especially during the first 10 days of school. It's sort of like walking into a Home Depot for the first time as a person who's never been before or done any home improvement, right? And so thinking about who would be most successful in this format, what barriers are there for us to access what we need. And so we can kind of see that this experience as a novice home improvement person might be overwhelming. We don't know where to find things. We don't know what efficiencies exist. And so we have to do a better job of creating predictability and access and models in our online learning. So what are some things that we need to consider when organizing our online space during those first 10 days of school and getting that across to students? And so again, if you would pause the video, I have another question for you on the Padlet. So we see the feather here. So please head on over to the Padlet and answer that 3rd question. So pause the video and then come right back. In our district, the organizational tool, our learning management system is Google Classroom. But typically we would want to pair other tools with Google Classroom for the curation and delivery of content. So Google is just our organizational tool. So we need to think about how are we going to use other tools strategically in concert with Google Classroom, and how are we going to ensure that that's established during the first 10 days of school. And so this is the lens that we need to have. We need to ensure equity, access, maintenance that includes efficiency, and ensure that it is student-centered, and that we have some of those personalized pathways for kids. So these are some things to think about. How are we going to access the learning materials? How are we going to teach students how to access them during the first 10 days of school? How are we going to make that access predictable? How are we going to share that predictability during the first 10 days of school? How are we going to communicate with students and families? And how are we going to communicate how our classroom systems work during the first 10 days of school? How are we going to share expectations, academic expectations, participation expectations, expectations for engaging in content? And how are we going to integrate those curriculum resources that we already have, the reading, writing notebook, those texts that we brought out in Unit 0? How are we going to pull all of that efficiently and seamlessly into this system? So there are 4 basic pillars of distance ed. Synchronous teaching. We know that those protocols that we're going to talk about a little bit later and that we talked about earlier on in the presentation are going to be really important for using during synchronous teaching. Asynchronous teaching, what is that? Reading, annotation, writing. How are we going to include mini lessons that give students the power of pause that they can go back to? So for example, how could we curate a library of Screencastify lessons with, say, a Google form that students could use to respond to after they do the mini lesson? And then also we may have asynchronous personalized pathways. So we need to consider both aspects. How will we create predictable feedback and assessment loops? And how can we use, say, the reader and writer notebook, conferring, and all of those pieces we have available to us as ELA teachers to create a nurturing classroom virtually. So here we have linked for you an excellent strategic planning tool around establishing and creating your virtual classroom that is tailored to ELA. So if you click here, you'll find kind of a thinking progression of questions for how you're going to set up your classroom and how you're going to communicate with families about this so that it's all ready to go and can be modeled during the first 10 days of school. And so this is tailored to ELA, and we hope that you find this to be a useful tool. And one thing we really need to remember when we think about predictability is that we want to limit the number of tools. So we are all going to use Google Classroom, but then what is our site for content curation? And then what tools, maybe 3 or 4, are we going to use strategically for those synchronous protocols and meets? We cannot overwhelm students and parents with logins and access and 27 different platforms, forms, and apps. We want to be really strategic about, well, if these are our goals for student learning, and these are our goals for what we want our distance learning classroom to be like, then what are those tools that we want to leverage strategically and intentionally so that we're not overwhelming the end user, which is students and families. And we, again, that strategy part has to do with replicating the aspects of a safe, productive classroom at a distance with intentionality. And so we need to think about how in-person classrooms use time. Well, we have routines and pacing. We have dedicated times for independent reading, for group discussion, for independent practice. We have intentional pacing, and we establish success criteria, and we give feedback all along the way, which honestly, establishing those feedback loops might be easier during distance learning. So here again, we see our feathers. So if you could head on over to the Padlet and answer the next question, go ahead and pause this video and then come back. So as we're establishing our digital classroom And as we are communicating those expectations for engagement and modeling them during the first 10 days of school, we need to think about all three of these layers: cultural, process, and academic. So how are we going to embed all three of these layers into our weekly instruction? And then how are we going to balance the synchronous and the asynchronous in a way that is predictable every single week? So students and parents should be able to access a schedule that shows the asynchronous work and the options for synchronous engagement throughout the week. I highly suggest offering multiple meeting times around the same topics, so that depending on student work schedules, family schedules, and technology, students will always be able to access a face-to-face time with the teacher. So again, coming back to our plan for our first 10 days of school, if these are our learning targets, these are our standards, these are the texts, and these are the tasks and the community building pieces like the reading and writing notebook that we want to establish, we need to go back to our strategic plan and think about how we're going to use these digital tools to get at all of these layers for students. So here's an example of a weekly schedule that could be tailored, and we would want to share this with parents during the very first days of school. And so the suggestion would be that on Monday in Google Classroom and through whatever your school's established communication application is, we would be communicating with parents what the weekly plan is, and we would post our tasks, our schedule for synchronous meets, when and where our lessons are going to be posted, and sort of what is the plan for the week. We would want to communicate all of that on Monday. We would want all of our mini lessons to drop, be ready in that curated library on Monday. And again, we may want students to do a Padlet or a Google form to show that they've engaged with that mini lesson, but we also want to give them the power of pause so that they can go back and access it. Across Tuesday and Wednesday, we may want to offer a couple of synchronous meets, maybe one at 10 a.m. and one at 2 p.m. And we may want to use some protocols that I'm going to show you later digitally that are linked here for doing those meets, those small groups. And then we may want students to turn in a draft or some kind of formative performance based on their work Monday and Tuesday. Based on that formative work, we may provide more mini lessons. And again, then on the afternoon of Wednesday or on Thursday, we might provide options for conferring or small group instruction or tasks that involve protocols. And then all along the way, we may have that independent reading, writing notebook that we're giving feedback on in independent reading. And we may have those ongoing Genius Hours or passion projects or even Tier 2 and 3 support with Edmentum. That would be happening, Edmentum or ExactPath or any number of things happening all along the way. And a reminder that ThinkCirca, which many of you have been trained on, the skills lessons and direct instruction lessons are a really great fit to be modified into mini lessons. And also that ThinkCirca can be core instruction. It can also be personalized pathways. So be thinking about how you can leverage ThinkCirca as a piece of this puzzle as well. So in here, I've linked this really powerful article by Zaretta Hammond about the power of protocols for equity. We know that protocols elevate student voice and democratize the classroom. And during distance learning, we still want students to have access to that. And so what you'll find on page 2 of our strategic planning document is some support around how we can use protocols for small group and synchronous work during virtual learning. So I'm going to scroll up here, and here you'll see linked in this document some support. And we're going to come back to this top part a little bit later, but if you scroll down, you'll see some ideas about how you pair tools, digital tools, core tools, with say, a gallery walk and how to do it digitally. So for example, if you click here for gallery walk, it'll take you to some step-by-step directions from Better Lessons, betterlesson.com, on how to integrate that and how to deliver it. And then here, these are the digital tools that you're going to need to do that digital gallery walk. And so we have Jigsaw, Socratic Seminars, Fishbowl, Rally Coach, some self-assessment pieces, silent conversation. And so as you're thinking about planning your synchronous and small group activities for the week, this could be a really great tool to use for tasks for students during that synchronous learning. So now we have segued into developing quality tasks and engaging students using digital tools. So we've sort of backward planned using Unit 0. We've thought about what structures and pacing and routines we want to think about, and we've thought about how we want to integrate those in the first 10 days of school and have all of that planning completed. So now we need to ensure that if we're going to be using gallery walks, we're going to be using some of those other tasks, we need to establish and model that during the first days of school. So here are our questions. How do we design tasks that students can access? How do we make them predictable and consistent? How do we support and provide feedback? And how do we make this creation replicable and sustainable? So typically when we think of tasks, like when I was showing you Unit 0, we think of formative and summative tasks, but during distance learning, we have far more tasks that we need to model and engage students in. So all of these tasks require a digital tool. And so I want to take us back to the document we were just on. Here we have some suggestions. Here are the digital tools that are a really good fit for introducing new material, engaging and curating content, communicating with families, assessing progress, synthesis and composition. So we've made some suggestions of matching the digital tool to the task, but all of these pieces are going to need consistency and predictability from you as the teacher that has to be established in the first 10 days of school. So for example, if you're going to use Screencastify to record your mini lessons and then use some kind of tool for students to be accountable for having engaged in that, then you probably should be planning to use Screencastify throughout the entirety of NTI. And all of those lessons need to be housed in a single curated space on Google Classroom, on a Google site, maybe both, or a Wakelet, whatever you're using, because students need to have predictability. We can't be using Google Meet for a lesson, then Screencastify, and having them housed all over the place. We have to decide on those core tools and how we're going to structure that learning. So again, it looks like we have the feather here. So if you would head on over, pause this, and head on over to the Padlet and answer the question, and then come back to us. The one thing that we need to remember with tasks is that it's much like driving. We have to have simulations during the first 10 days of school that model how students are going to engage. We want to communicate with parents and families that this is what you can expect on Monday. Here is a sample schedule of our week. Here's where you have choice. Here's how I will communicate with you when our synchronous meeting choices are. And then that first 10 days of school, that's where we're really that backseat or shoulder-to-shoulder driver, where we are bringing in relevant content, but we're using that content to model the structures, the protocols, the academic tasks, and those other tasks that we talked about, so that we are ready to go as we transition into Module 1. And then we can, of course, park, where we are more fully releasing, because we've established that cadence, we've established those structures, and we've established those routines, both digitally and academically. And so I think we have captured all of these pieces what we should prioritize during the first days of school, what structures and routines we're considering, and how we develop quality tasks using the appropriate digital tools. And so I'll close with this: the classroom remains the most radical space of possibility in the academy. This is my favorite quote from Bell Hooks. I'd love to hear what inspires you as educators over on the Padlet. And even though this is a new journey and a new day and a time of uncertainty, I hope that you will look forward with hope and the possibility of this new journey for students and teachers. And please avail yourselves of the amazing professional learning content that we have available coming up beginning the week of August 10th on our digital learning channel. The professional learning schedule is available here. And you'll see, not yet, but each day starting August 10th will be populated with on the hour and on the half hour professional learning that you can access live and then will be available on the digital learning channel recorded. So please reach out to me on Twitter. You see my Twitter handle there, or via email if there's anything I can do to support you. You can also drop any questions you might have in the Padlet, and I'll be checking that Padlet to see who attended and to respond to any questions or ideas that I saw in that Padlet. So again, thank you so much for being here and all that you do for students and families.